evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com. Also want to welcome the listeners over there at WFOV 92.1, and we also have a posting going up on Facebook, and want to thank them as well for joining us this afternoon. We come together every Monday at 2 o'clock, and we're again back here at the studio from 2 o'clock to 3. We have a few topics we want to cover, and some of the cleanup we want to do from last week. We didn't finish what we were talking about last week, and I want to finish it up today in terms of some of the discussions we've gotten into. And I want to add a couple of things, what I'm saying about the impeachment process that I think will be something said here that's not said anywhere else in the country. I don't think people understand it as well as we understand it here. And I'm not bragging about that, but listen to the scholars, Lawrence Tribe, Alan Dershowitz, Napolitano, Mark Levine, some of the others. And I've not found a single one that really understands the totality of the impeachment process. And I think it's because they don't understand, or they don't seem to understand, that the Constitution is written thematically. And unless you understand the holistic aspects of it, in other words, to understand the Constitution in its totality, then you really won't understand it, because you can't take one separate part of it and then take it in isolation out of context of the rest of the Constitution and then understand it. For example, in past programs, I was showing something that has become much more important today than it was when I was going over it. And what I was saying in an earlier program was that the members of the House and members of the Senate are not civil officers of the United States. And that has picked up greater relevance now, given that we're continuing to talk about the impeachment process. And I wanted to make the point that that is important when you hear them saying now that the impeachment process is found in Article 2, Section 4. And I've said in previous programs, and I said last week, as a matter of fact, that that's not true. And it's very dangerous for them to say that it's found in Article 2, Section 4. And I will explain later on why it is dangerous and why what they're quoting as the impeachment process in Article 2 is not found in Article 2, it's found in Article 1. But there is language in Article 2 that governs the use of the impeachment process, and I want to explain why it's in Article 2, and I think you'll understand it once we begin to make the connections of some of the other parts of the Constitution. But you recall in a past program that I did where I was talking about what's found in Article 1, Section 6, Clause 2, and I was using that language to show that the members of the House and Senate are not civil officers of the United States of America. That is not to say they're not civil officers, but they are civil officers of the states that they represent. Therefore, the language that is found in Article 1, Section 6, Clause 2, and let me read it to you so we can be on the same page about the language itself, and I'm going to read the language, and then we'll see that if you can read it, if you really can understand what's being said in that language, you'll see that it does exclude them. And also, they also exclude it again if you can read the language in Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2.
Now, I just got a question here. Okay, remember when senators used to be chosen by their states themselves directly, right?
By state legislatures.
By the state. Now, would some people say that means now it is a congressmen and senators are now considered a federal government, person?
No, because what it did was it began to provide for the election of the senators the same way that the members of the House are provided for. You see, they're only elected within their own states. It's not a nationwide election as it is in the President of the United States. And I want to get to that because I want to explain some of the differences in the way in which we, in the federal system, have the elections and why it's divided the way it's divided. I'm going to explain that today, and I'm going to say some things here that I want the scholars to stay tuned, because nobody has made this, the point I'm going to make today, nobody has made this point, I don't think, throughout the history of the United States. But I will make a point today that will hopefully put everything in context, because I want to explain why you have the clause that says the president, vice president, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office upon impeachment for, comma, and a conviction of, another comma, treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. And you have to pause between those two, because it's setting out the two parts of the impeachment process that must be realized in order to bring about the impeachment. But the language that I'm quoting here is in Article 2, Section 4, which some of the scholars, Mark Levine was one, Mike McConnell was another, that said that language is the impeachment clause. The impeachment clause is not found there. That's the removal clause, as I said last week. And I want to tell you why that particular clause, Article 2, Section 4, why that's found in Article 2. There's a reason why they put it there. But don't forget what I've said already. The Constitution is thematically written. And so you have to understand how one part adds to what's said in another part. If you don't know what's said earlier, you won't understand the intent and the implication of the language found elsewhere. But stay with me here. I'm going to make a point here about why it is found in Article 2. And I don't think anybody in the country understands this. And I'm not bragging, but I have found them wanting in terms of their understanding of the Constitution. That's including Lawrence Tribe at Harvard University and Alan Dershowitz, who I'm getting to really question about a lot of things, given the fallout that's happening right now with this case just came out again with Jeffrey Epstein. And we'll hopefully get around to that as well. But right now, let me stay on the impeachment just for a few minutes. Okay, so the impeachment process is found in Article 1, not in Article 2. Article 1 sets up the process, the method through which impeachment is carried out. And it's carried out by a majority vote in the House, and it's then it's referred to the Senate, where the Senate then will sustain the impeachment by a 2/3 vote. And if they don't have a 2/3 vote, then it's not sustained, and then the case, in fact, is dismissed. It's very important that we understand that that is a process and not in Article 2, Section 4. And why is that important? It's important because if you make Article 2, Section 4 the impeachment process, and then you say, on the other hand, that the impeachment process is not subject to review by the court, if you make that the process, then the removed and office holder cannot be reviewed because you're claiming that's a process of impeachment. You understand what I'm saying here? That is very dangerous for them to say that. That's not the process. The process is in Article 1. Now, let me explain why you have the language of removal in Article 2. Listen up, Lawrence Tribe and Alan Dershowitz, Mark Levine, Mark McConnell, and others, because you don't understand this. The reason that you have the removal clause found in Article 2, which sets up the executive branch of government, is because every civil office holder of the United States is appointed by the president. Therefore, the removal clause is found in Article 2, where the executive branch is founded. And that's what I was saying about what Article 1, Section 6, Clause 2 says, and excludes the members of the Congress as civil office holders, and does it in this way. Listen to this very carefully. This is Article 1, Section 6, Clause 2. Here's what it says. No senator or representative shall, during the time for which he was elected, be appointed to any civil office under the authority of the United States. A senator and a member of the House cannot be appointed to any civil office under the United States, under the authority of the United States. And why is that? It's because the members of the Senate, still true today, although we have the 17th Amendment that changed the way in which, in the manner in which we elect them, they still are the representatives and civil officers of the states in which they came. And if you notice it, when we had this secession movement back in 1861, people identified with their state. That's why Jefferson Davis, who was a senator, once the secession movement was carried out by his state, Jefferson Davis gave up his position in the Senate and went back to Mississippi, because he was a representative not of the United States. He was a representative of the state that elected him. At that time, the state legislature. So when it says in Article 1, Section 6, Clause 2, no senator or representative shall, during the time for which he was elected, be appointed to any civil office under the authority of the United States, it means that he has not been elected to any office under the authority of the United States. He's under the authority of the state from which he came. Now, it does not mean he cannot be censored by the members of the House if he's a member of the House, he or she is a member of the House, or cannot be censored by the Senate if he or she is a member of the Senate. But that's found in Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2. But Article 1, Section 6, Clause 2 itself excludes members of the House and Senate from being members of the federal office of the United States. They're in the federal government, but they're there as state representatives. And that's why you have this language here that says no senator or representative shall, during the time which he was elected, be appointed to any civil office under the authority of the United States. It does not say any other office, because that would be, if they said any other office, that would be to say then they already have an office under the authority of the United States, but they cannot be appointed to any other office under the authority of the United States, and it does not say that. And they can't read it. I read it to you and explain why it reads the way that it reads. It's not only said there, but look at Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2. Let me read this to you. You see, I said the Constitution is written thematically. And therefore, if you understand the theme of it, and one of the themes of it, many themes are found in it, but one of the themes is that we have not only a separation of powers on the federal level, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. You also have a disaggregation of power on the vertical level in the federal system. That is, the federal government has certain powers assigned to it in Article 1, Section 8, delegation of powers found in that particular part of the Constitution. And then you have in that which is not delegated to the federal government, by the way, delegated to the federal government by the states, then that which is not bequeathed to the federal government is therefore retained by the states. And that's also was said and meant by Article 1, Section 8. But if it's not that clear, then go and read Amendment 10, where the point is reiterated, where it says that all powers that are not expressly given to the federal government, nor excluded by the Constitution to the states, are retained by the states and to the people therein. So not only is it then found in Article 1, Section 6, Clause 2, that you have the members of the House and members of the Senate that are expressly taken out of the orbit of being federal office holders because they're state office holders. And you'd have a contradiction, you see, if you had them occupying a federal office while also occupying a state office in which they were elected by the representatives in their own state. You have a contradiction here, and the question is, which master would you serve? So to forego that problem, then they are written out of being federal office holders, made clear in the language in the Constitution, if you can read it, in Article 1, Section 6, Clause 2. But it's also found in Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2, and I'm going to read that to you as well. Listen to this part here. Each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors. We're talking here about the Electoral College and how we choose the president by the Electoral College, one of the greatest bequeathals made to us by the founders of this nation, who were consummate thinkers. So each state shall appoint, in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct, a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives. The senators elected by the state to the Congress in Washington, and the representatives that are elected by the states to the Congress. The representatives are voted to represent us in the House of Representatives, and the senators, of course, are representing us in the Senate. The way you count the electors, that is to say, how many votes based upon those state representatives. Look how the framers are in that room thinking this process through. The representatives sent to the Congress by the states, whether they're senators or members of the House, the same number of state representatives and the same number of senators added together, 16 in this state, we have 14 members of the House and 2 members of the Senate, meaning then we have 16 electors or 16 electoral votes. The electoral votes are based upon the state's representatives. You see what is happening here? The states, they are the ones that are choosing the President of the United States. The states are in charge of the process here. And so when I read in Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2, it says this, and all it's going to do here is going to reinforce what's said in Article 1, Section 6, Clause 2. See, I know it very well, and that's why I challenge these scholars on it, because they don't know it. And I am tuned in to what they're saying, and I can tell you that they do not understand it. I've listened to all of them, and they don't understand this process. And that's why I'm coming behind them to correct them. And behind my voice, they will have nothing to say. That I guarantee you. If they do say it, they're going to be smashed because they don't have it. Each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress. Here's a caveat. But no senator or representative or person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed an elector. It excludes the members of the House from being an elector. It excludes the members of the Senate from being electors. And then it says it excludes persons holding an office of trust or profit under the United States. That's consistent with what I read in Article 1, Section 6, Clause 2, isn't it? And do I need to read that again to you? Because I can read it again. I don't mind going over it again because I know this is not being taught, and so therefore maybe it needs some reiteration, but I can tell you that the language is very consistent here. And in 2 different places, if they understood the theme of the Constitution, they would understand the exclusion that has already occurred in it, so that they would understand better also why it is that the impeachment clause is found in Article 1, but the removal clause is found in Article 2. I'll get to that in just a minute. I want to make sure you understand the first part of this narrative. So let me go back to Article 1, Section 6, Clause 2 again and read this to you to show you how consistent it is. No senator or representative shall, during the time for which he was elected, and they were saying he then because women were not endowed with the vote until 1920, to which he was elected, be appointed to any civil office under the authority of the United States. So then that tells you right there that the members of the Senate and members of the House are not on the authority of the United States, but on the authority of the states that sent them there. Okay, now let me go back to read Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2. Show you how consistent it is what's found in the other part of the Constitution. But you see, you have to first of all understand Article 1, but understanding Article 2, which sets up the executive branch, you see where it says this: each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress, but no senator or representative or person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed an elector. You see, it doesn't say here, or other person, it says other person, meaning that in addition to the exclusion, the senators and representatives, it also excludes persons holding an office of trust, because it's saying there that the senators and the members of the House do not have office of trust under the authority of the United States. Now, does that mean that they cannot be removed from the House and by the Senate? No, it does not mean that. What it means is that they cannot be removed from the House and Senate through the impeachment process. And why is that true? Because in Article 2, Section 4, it says the president, vice president, and all civil, doesn't say military, all civil officers of the United States. You see, we've already excluded the members of the House and Senate. All civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. So the members of the House and Senate are excluded from the impeachment process. But it does not mean that they're not subject to being called upon malfeasance in office. And that's found in Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2. And I'll read that to you. And then I'll get to my main point here, which is why you have the removal clause found in Article 2. But here's what you have in Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2. Each House may determine the rules of its proceedings, punish its members for disorderly behavior, and with the concurrence of 2/3 expel a member. That's different than the impeachment process, because the impeachment process requires a acquisition in the House of Representatives. That's found in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5, where it says that the House should choose its Speaker and shall have the sole power of impeachment. Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5. Then, after you have made the impeachment in that particular part of the Congress, this is referred to the Senate, and that is in fact compelled into existence by Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6, where it says that the Senate shall try all impeachments. The trial is in the Senate, and there it takes a 2/3 vote. But not, since the senators and the members of the House are not members under the authority of the United States, but under the authority of their own states, therefore the impeachment process does not include the members of the House and members of the Senate. Therefore, they have a special way in which they are brought to bear upon any violations of their office in the House and in the Senate. And that's found in Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2, where it says that, in that part, now I'll read that to you as well, each House may determine the rules of its proceedings, punish its members for disorderly behavior, and with the concurrence of 2/3, expel a member. So then, 2/3 of the members of the House can expel one of its members by a 2/3 verdict in that particular chamber of the House. If the problem is in the Senate with the senators, they can then expel one of their members without concurrence with the House. They can expel one of their members by a 2/3 vote in the Senate. And it's not referred to the other chamber, because the chambers are supposed to be co-equal. Particularly are they co-equal now because, not numerically co-equal, but they are co-equal in terms, particularly now, of how we elect our senators, because it was changed in 1913 with the 17th Amendment. Okay, now, the big point I want to make, I hope the scholars are listening, because nobody has said this anywhere in any of the records that I've been able to come in contact with. And we'll come back to this point on the other side of the break as well. But I want to make it this point before, while they're on their break as well. But WFOV is going to take a break at this point, and they'll come back in 4 minutes hopefully, and we'll see them on the other side of the break. I will continue with this with the listeners at allpointstv.com and also those in Facebook. But I will reiterate the point when they come back, because I don't want them to miss this point, because it's very critical. And it also explains why it's very dangerous for these persons like Napolitano and some of the others, Mark Levine, Michael McConnell, that are saying the impeachment process is found in Article 2. That's very dangerous. And I will explain that as well on the other side of the break. When they come back, we'll reiterate these points.
Don't you think it'd be interesting if they actually required everybody who wants to run for a seat in Congress or a seat in the Senate, they actually required to become scholars of the Constitution? Because I've heard people, Nancy Pelosi in particular, and that woman too, last name was Wilson, no relation to me, said that people who are criticizing or mocking members of Congress on the internet should be arrested and tried for that. I guess the First Amendment is no longer applicable when you're offending a Democrat, Yeah. You can do anything you want to anybody else. You get a religious right, Christians, Jewish, Orthodox, whatever. But if you do, you cannot criticize or mock a congressman or senator, because that's punishable. I think that it's so absurd, because I grew up knowing that. Mm-hmm. It seems like everybody else I knew that was the First Amendment. Yet this woman who sits in a very powerful position seems to be oblivious to that as a fact.
John, I'll tell you something that we need to understand about these politicians, and we understand it at least here in this country than they do in other parts of the world. We've been more deluded about our politicians than they are in other parts of the world. But I have to tell you something. This is a Maussian view. There is nothing, and nothing is, I'm using that word nothing generically here. I don't mean that it's absolute, but it's close to being absolute. There is nothing on any high level that can be stated from any factual reference by people who are elected to political office. These are not just scholars, and even if they were scholars, the scholars are not necessarily all that either, particularly now in this environment where all the schools have become football and basketball schools. And also, there is not only very little, if anything, that they can tell you about anything, because they're not really experts in any particular area, except lying to the American people to get elected, and also using money to buy votes. They have expertise in those areas. But beyond that, there's really nothing that we need to, that we can learn from politicians. And we are wasting our time, quite frankly, listening to them.
I think basically you can learn everything you need to know about a politician and dealing with an irritated little 3-year-old. They throw temper tantrums and hold their breath. It's the same thing. I think that's a real good, close approximation.
It's very close. John, they're disguised, but some of the most inept people in our society are now the ones in government. Do you think they understand finance? Do you run your financial affairs the way this country's financial affairs are run? How many of you have a deficit that exceeds your annual income? I would dare say, as a matter of fact, I would dare say that probably none of the people out here in the listening audience have a deficit, that have engaged in deficit spending that goes above their annual revenue. So if you make, let's say you make minimum wage, and minimum wage, let's put it at, if you're a person that's single, let's put it at $15,000. And And if you have a family, let's put it at $21,000. And let's say that you are therefore in the lower economic bracket. I bet you that those that are earning an income of $15,000 a year do not have debts that in terms of your spending debts. I'm not talking about you trying to buy a house or you got a car, and I'm talking about you have debts out there where you borrowed money with nothing to show for it, like these politicians have done in Washington. And I bet there's nobody that has a debt beyond the place to stay and a place to and something to drive, some mode of transportation. I bet you that nobody has a debt even approaching their income stream anywhere. So let's compare that to them. They take in $4 trillion a year in revenue, and they spend $1 million a day above that. So at the end of the year, although they're collecting $4 trillion at gunpoint because we don't voluntarily give our money up, and you might say then we have taxation with representation, but one guy was asking, since you say you fought a war over taxation without representation, he said, how do you like it with representation? As if it's better with them taking money at gunpoint if you have people up there who claim to be speaking your name. That's another thing we got to think about in terms of those representatives up there as well, and that is that nobody's up there in Washington speaking in our name. They're speaking in their own name. The people out here have a whole different voice, but they're very well disguised, and that's why they get away with what they get away with. They are up here highly masked, and people think that these people are representatives because they wear the label of representatives behind their name, and they wear the label of senators, representing representatives of whom? Is this climate change? Is that representing the United States? Are we the ones out here saying the world's going to end in 12 years? How many persons out here believe that? That they are panicking us, talking about we are causing, by use of CO2, carbon dioxide, that we are in fact causing global warming. Is that our voice or is that their voice? And is that true or is that anti-scientific? And which are the ones that are saying that are scientists? The scientists that are actually saying that's not in the employ of the politicians, are saying just the opposite of that. Because you can't have CO2, which is a greenhouse gas, and then have a greenhouse gas causing pollution and causing global warming. That's a politician saying that, not the American people. So you look on all the levels. I'm talking about finance. I'm talking about the legalistic aspect, the politics, the laws they pass. Look and see who's violating all the canons. And they're the same people the people that are violating the laws are the ones making the laws. And the ones that are supposed to be reining in and using our money wisely are the ones that are violating it as well, because we have a $70 trillion debt right now. That which is on the books and that which they took off the books. They've taken $38 trillion off the books. In fact, let's see. Since we got $2 trillion on the book, they're taking $48 trillion of debt off the books because we got a $70 trillion debt. And that's just the debt that they have taken off the books temporarily for this moment in time. But we're going to be meeting debt every day because debt is postponed into the future. My debt, by the way, and I pay my debt off each month. I use 2 credit cards, and I charge credit every month, but I pay it off at the end of the month so the debt doesn't sit there. But if you let debt sit there, you're going to find out whatever bill they sent you the month before, when they send you another bill and you let that debt sit there, you may have paid some minimum amount on it, which they try to get you to do anyway. They pay the minimum amount on it. But by the time the debt comes back the next month, it has in fact gone above what it was the month before. Because as the debt sits there daily, it's accumulating more debt. And our debt is sitting there, $22 trillion of debt on the books sitting there, another $48 trillion of debt sitting on the sidelines, but still accumulating interest on the debt. That's why those numbers that you see going up on those registers, and the politicians have caused that. You see, there's nothing that a politician says that I want to hear, because I understand who they are, and I understand who they are here, and I understand who they are on the planet, everywhere they are. They're the same people. They're not different here than they are anywhere else. So, I want to get to that too later on. But don't forget what I'm trying to say here in the first part of this program. The impeachment process is found in Article 1. Just remember that. The removal clause using the impeachment process to bring about the removal of federal office holders, and I've said the members of the House and Senate are not federal office holders, so it does not pertain to them, because it says the president, vice president, all civil office holders of the United States. And the senators and members of the House are not office holders of the United States, so therefore they are precluded from that language. Their removal is caused by Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2, where each branch of the Congress can expel its own members by a 2/3 verdict in each of the chambers of the Congress. That's in Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2. The impeachment process is found in Article 2, Section 4. Now, I said I was going to wait till you got back because I wanted to make this point here. And I think I'm the only one in the country, and I may well be the only one that's ever made this point. And that speaks volumes if this is true, and I think it is true because I've searched to see if I can find anyone else that made this point today. Of course, none of them have because they don't understand it by what they're saying on TV. And that's including this jughead, Judge Napolitano, who embarrassed himself by an article that came out April 25th. And it says, Judge Knapp on impeachment. And they quote him as saying, Congress can impeach anybody for the reasons set forth in the Constitution. You know what? You may not be disgusted by reading that, but when I read that, I find that comment to be despicable. Congress can impeach anybody for the reasons set forth in the Constitution. You have to be a dunce cap. You have to be dumb as a doorknob to say that. Because there are no requirements in the Constitution for impeachment. And Judge Knapp, which you must have been taking a nap when you said that, show me where that's found in the Constitution, you fathead. You have to be, folks, you cannot be a scholar and say this. Congress can impeach anybody for the reasons set forth in the Constitution. You know, I was telling you why it's dangerous to say that the impeachment process is found in Article 2. And it's dangerous because, you see, they are correct in saying that the Constitution does not allow the Supreme Court to inject itself, any of the federal courts, to inject itself into the impeachment process. But you see, the problem is that they made what is found in Article 2 of the impeachment process, not the impeachment process found in Article 1. If you inject that into Article 2 and say they cannot interfere with that, you're saying then that which is political can be used with no oversight of the political process by the courts. Which would mean this then. It would mean that the President of the United States does not have the equal protection of the law. because you can take his office from him politically with no recourse. These people are dangerous saying this, that the impeachment process is found in Article 2. It's not found in Article 2. You jugheads. Folks, you can't be a scholar and say this. You cannot be a constitutional scholar and say what Judge Knapp, meaning Napolitano, said: Congress can impeach anybody for the reasons set forth in the Constitution. There are no requirements for impeachment that are set up in the Constitution, only the method through which he is impeached. For anything that is in fact that has a majority of votes in the House, and if there is 2/3 concurrence in the Senate, then impeachment stands. But given its political aspects, if you try to take that political situation, that impeachment process, which on the face of it is political, that's why it goes on in a political body, not in the courts. If it goes on in the political body and they impeach, if they do through the impeachment what each of the House of the Congress can do to its own members in Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2, if they do that through the impeachment process, where they will in fact do that if they impeach in the House, if they impeach in the Senate, they can do that since they can censor their own members. But if you use that impeachment clause to remove, then something else happens here. What Judge Knapp is saying comes into play. Not impeachment, removal. Congress can, he says, impeach. No, Congress can remove anybody for the reasons set forth in the Constitution. Treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. On those bases, you can remove the president, the vice president, and all civil officers of the United States. But here's the other part of that. You see what's happened here now? What was a political process in Article 1 has now moved into a legal process. And what makes it legal? Because now the Constitution sets up a requirement for the removal. Why? Because in Donald Trump's case, 63 million people voted for Donald Trump. And Joy Reid, you were on C-SPAN yesterday. One of my friends called me and told me to watch it. I missed it on C-SPAN 1. I caught it back. I caught it when it played again on C-SPAN 2. And Joy Reid is on CNN. She's out of her mind. She has a book out called Donald Trump, Who Sold America. How much did he get for it? How much did the man that foregoes a salary of $400,000 a year, that does not even receive a salary, how much did he get for selling the United States? And show me the check that he got for it.
Besides, even if the president did sell it out, their Democrats are just mad because the people they sold it to are pissed off. That's about it.
John, sold it before they could sell it, but Donald Trump did not do any selling. What they're hiding is that they are not willing to accept the verdict of the American people, and they're still fighting this president. And they're mad. I heard before I came to the studio today, they're mad at this president. They're saying he's dividing the country. He's not dividing the country. The liberals are dividing the country.
Well, see, the thing is, I look at politics as you should vote your own interest, okay? Who's going to serve your best interest? That's the reason why you vote, right? Well, if they can't convince me voting for them is going to help me out, and I'm supposed to sacrifice everything I believe in, stand for, and work for, and everything, for their vision. I trust my own visions for my own future, but why should I acquiesce to them? And it's like, they scream bloody murder, they turn red in the face, they call label. They can't make an intellectual case, an intelligible case, they just want to use emotions. And then when you don't buy into it, you're this hard feeling individual, and they want to demonize you and make you pathological. But they're the ones who are pathological. They're so easily triggered.
They are pathological, and the only way that the vote will serve the interests of the American people if they use the vote to do what Peter Schweizer calls for, and that's his book here. I'm talking about Democrats, and I'm also talking about Republicans. Throw them all out. The reason why they're mad at Donald Trump is because the American people went to the poll because they're fed up with Democrats, and they're fed up, rightfully so, with Republicans. And they went to a person who never even held elective office. Can you imagine how embarrassing that is? If these people had any kind of personal honor and any kind of integrity, they would have understood the verdict that was rendered by the American people, which was, we don't trust any of y'all. And they would have begun to clean their act up to earn the respect again of the American people.
So I didn't like the way the elections ran pretty much, or came out, since pretty much I was a kid and I saw people get elected, because I've never been enamored with any of the presidents. And but so basically I had to sit through 8 years of Clinton and 8 years of Obama, sitting there grinding my teeth because people voted for him, and they thought, well, then they woke up and said, well, guess what? These guys are even getting worse. And we just can't stand this. We'd like to keep some of our paycheck, please. I mean, we work for it. So they said no. And that's basically what it boils down to. And they always talk about, you don't understand our visions. The only people I personally knew that had visions were dropping LSD. I don't trust them. I wouldn't trust their visions for anything. So, I mean, if they have visions, okay, that's good. Just, just put on the lava lamp and sit in your darkened room. But
yeah,
I don't
there's
care
no
about
vision that they have for the country. If they had a vision, they would not, in fact, drive this country into oblivion the way they're doing it. They're driving this country off a cliff. And this $4 trillion debt that they are incurring, $1 trillion of debt every year that they're incurring by spending $1 million a day. And we are creating $1 trillion of debt every year, adding to the national debt. $10 trillion were added under Barack Obama. And we now have a debt that exceeds our gross national product. Our gross national product is about 18 trillion. You have a debt, a national debt that exceeds your GNP, your gross national product, is 18 trillion. Your national debt, the amount of debt the country has on the books, is 22 trillion. So they don't have a vision. If they had a vision, they would not be doing that to our children and our grandchildren. And they only do it to them because they cannot register a vote against them.
Well, I think they
cannot raise an objection.
I think the leftists have a vision they want to see us in. They always want to see us living in little huts, and everybody gathering around a communal campfire. Our teeth are falling out. We're dying and stuff of diseases. But we're all at evenings after hard labeling in the fields, which they extract huge sum to fuel their own existence. Like most of them are parasitic. They would want us to be happy on that very simple lifestyle. We can't travel, according to Ocasio. She wants to ban air travel. Mm-hmm. So except for she and those other elites. Mm-hmm. So basically, we're going to be stuck. We're going to be not too much on like serfs or peasants stuck to the ground and can't get up from that and can't challenge authority, because if we mock them or even suggest we don't like what they're doing, according to that that other woman, we're supposed to be arrested and tried and convicted.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
John, they don't have a vision. What they have an agenda. I'm not saying they don't have a plan. They have an agenda, but a vision is one in which you are sitting in the corridors of power, and you are operative on the problem. A politician is a political operator. And if you have a vision, you are, and this is the way it was intended by the framers, you're operating upon the problems of the nation. And once you go to the nation's capital and do the work, that your vision was one in which you can go there and do the problem that you went there to resolve. Once you've done that, you go back to your job, just like they were doing back in that time period. You spend your human capital, you invest it in the furtherance of the best interest of the nation. Once you've done that and done your best in terms of what you can impart, you then turn over the reins of power to someone else who comes in, and it's their vision then that furthers that end. This is what George Washington did. George Washington did what he could do to lead this nation, and after 2 terms, he stood down. He didn't have to stand down, and that, by the way, made George Washington the one president we've had that was a great president just for that one act. I don't have a lot to say about his governance because he governed as a politician, and he was part of the original sin of the country. And the original sin of the country, by the way, before you start talking about slavery, the original sin of this country is that they betrayed the revolution. Alexander Hamilton, the Secretary of the Treasury, did what George L. Orwell wrote about in his book called Animal Farm, where when you're on the outside of power, you want to, in fact, get in power because you do not like the way power is being arrayed and wielded against you. But when you get in there, then what you do is, in fact, wield power in the same manner that was wielded when you were outside, complaining about it. And that was the original sin of the United States. As far as the slavery everybody's talking about, that was an inheritance from the British system.
All the way if you go back to the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Egyptians.
Oh,
go far back, yeah.
Okay, let me read this to you on page. Since you want to go there, I'll read this to you. The Real History of Slavery, Thomas Sowell's book. I'll read page 111, some parts of it. Slavery, reading Thomas Sowell's book, The Real History of Slavery. Slavery was an evil of greater scope and magnitude than most people imagine, and as a result, its place in history is radically different from the way it is usually portrayed. Mention slavery, and immediately the image that arises is that of Africans and their descendants enslaved by Europeans and their descendants. In the southern United States are at most Africans enslaved by Europeans in the Western Hemisphere. However, no other historic horror is so narrowly construed. No one thinks of war, famine, or decimating epidemics in such a localized term. These are afflictions, meaning war, famine, and decimating epidemics. These are afflictions that have been suffered by the entire human race all over the planet. And so was slavery. Had slavery been limited to one race in one country during 3 centuries, as it's localized here in this country, its tragedies would not have been 1/10 the magnitude that they were in fact. So if you're talking about slavery and you're talking about the original sin as if it started here and it's localized here, what Thomas Sowell would have you know is that you're not even talking about 1/10 of the slavery that was in fact of that magnitude in terms of the history of slavery throughout the world. Who wasn't practicing slavery when the founders had it? And that's why it's not the original sin, because the slavery did not originate with them. Slavery originated wherever the people were who were enslaved around the population that had more power than they had. And that's on all the continents, practiced by all the people throughout history. It really is in the West where slavery was being condemned and being made to go out of existence. The West can take that and clap for that part of it, because they're not the progenitors of slavery. They're the ones that brought it to a close. Not in Africa, not in Asia, but in Europe and in the United States. In Europe, it ended in 1831, and in the United States, it ended in 1865. But in terms of the enslavement itself, that was, in fact, a worldwide. That's what Thomas Sowell, I was just reading about Thomas Sowell. That's a worldwide phenomenon. It's not localized. They're trying to make it appear to the United States. The original sin of this country, there is an original sin, but it's just not the one we're talking about. The original sin of this country is that those that wrote those wonderful things down to restrain government power betrayed that which they had written in their own documents, began to violate it once they became the politicians themselves. And although Thomas Jefferson is to be admired for a lot of things that he did outside of the presidency, he was a very, very mediocre president. I do admire him for standing against what was being done by the Federalists, and that's to his credit. But in terms of his governance and him adding the Louisiana Purchase, that was a violation of the Constitution for him to add that without the consent. The Louisiana Purchase was unconstitutional. That was added by Jefferson in 1803. And that began to create a lot of problems inside the country because we had an arrangement in place at the Constitutional Convention by adding some states in terms of the balance of power between those who had the northern interest and those in the southern interest. That agreement at the Constitutional Convention began to come apart, and the one began to cause that rupture outside of Alexander Hamilton. It was being caused by the first, second, and third presidents of the United States. In other words, the founders were not good governors. But give them the credit that is due them, and that is they were great theoreticians. They set this in motion that allow us to have greater control over these criminals. You call them politicians, but that's who they are. They're criminals, basically, because they have the power of the state and the use of guns to initiate force against the citizens to extract wealth and place it in their hands to the benefit of the politicians who use it as bribery. You see, if you really would in fact apply Article 2, Section 4, there would not be a member in the Congress that would be able to stand up to Article 2, Section 4 if that were in fact being used against them. Although you don't use that against them because they're not federal office holders. But if you begin to make that standard one in which you brought them to heel based upon that in Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2, where they can be removed from office, if it was about bribery, all of them would be removed because all of them are in fact doing that. Okay, I'm going to get back to our lesson next time because I think we need to understand why the impeachment process is found in Article 2. And the reason why it's found in Article 2, which sets up the president, is because the president at that time appointed all of the federal office holders. Understand that. Napolitano and all you others out there who are the experts. That's why the removal clause is found in the executive branch, where it's set up in the executive branch, because the executive branch appoints all federal office holders. Because I said the House and the Senate are not federal office holders. Therefore, all those who occupy a federal office are appointed by the executive branch of government. And that's why the removal clause is found there. Okay, we'll get out of here for right now and come back next week. Hope you'll follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you will never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.